Hiya! Welcome to Sniper's Rest. Sniper's Rest is the last post rest stop in the here and there, the place between where you're coming from and where you're going. I am Sniper Shadow and I reside here in Sniper's Rest as a guide and custodian to those who pass through here. I visit the worlds within the multiverse often, but I am always here to guide and care for the travellers such as yourself that pass through the here and there. Welcome, my friend. I've had a time of it this last week. I got the dreaded goblin cough, a terrible affliction from the young'uns through a portal I'd never seen before. The folk over there called it the Crossroads. Wonderful place. I could simply spend years exploring there. I lost my voice, which caused havoc in the Arcade Paradise portal, over in the Starfield universe, and over in Spirity. One young laughed at me until I threw a towel over his head. Spiteful little cat spirit he is. Never mind all that now. I'm finally on the mend. Please take a rest here before continuing your journey. Last time we were reading the picture of Dorian Gray. Sybil performed her play very terribly, and in a moment of pure horridness, Dorian cast her aside. In doing so, he broke her heart. In an act of heartbreak and desperation, Sybil drank poison, and now Dorian has accepted his life of deviled debauchery. Let's find out what happens next. Chapter 9. As he was sitting at breakfast next morning, Basil Hallward was shown into the room. "I am so glad I have found you, Dorian," he said gravely. "I called last night and they told me you were at the opera. Of course I knew that was impossible, but I wish you had left word where you had really gone to. I passed a dreadful evening, half afraid that one tragedy might be followed by another. I think you might have telegraphed me for when you first heard of it. I read it quite by chance in the late edition of the Globe that I picked up at the club. I came here at once and was miserable to not finding you. I can't tell you how heartbroken I am about the whole thing. I know that you must suffer, but where were you? Did you go down and see the girl's mother? For a moment I thought of following you there. They gave the address in the paper. Somewhere in the Euston Road, isn't it? But I was afraid of intruding upon a sorrow that I could not lighten. Poor woman. What a state she must be in. And her only child, too. What did she say about it all?" "My dear Basil, how do I know?" murmured Dorian Gray, sipping some pale yellow wine from a delicate gold-beaded bubble of a Venetian glass and looking dreadfully bored. "I was at the opera. You should have come on there. I met Lady Gwendolen, Harry's sister, for the first time. We were in her box. She is perfectly charming, and Patty sang divinely. Don't talk about horrid subjects. If one doesn't talk about a thing, it has never happened. It is simply an expression, as Harry says, that gives reality to things. I may mention that she was not the woman's only child. There is a son, charming fellow, I believe, but he is not on the stage. He is a sailor or something. Now, tell me about yourself and what you are painting." "You went to the opera," said Hallward, speaking very slowly and with a strained touch of pain in his voice. You went to the opera while Sybil Vane was lying dead in some sordid lodging. You can talk to me of other women being charming and of Patty singing divinely before the girl you loved has even quiet of a grave to sleep in. Why, man, there are horrors in store for that little white body of hers." "Basil, stop. I won't hear of it," cried Dorian, leaping to his feet. "You must not tell me about things. What's done is done. What is past is past." "You call yesterday the past." "What has the actual lapse of time got to do with it? It is only shallow people who require years to get rid of an emotion. A man who is master of himself can end sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, to enjoy them, and to dominate them. Dorian, this is horrible. Something has changed you completely. You look exactly the same wonderful boy who day after day used to come down to my studio and sit for his picture. But you were simple, natural, and affectionate then. You were the most unspoiled creature in the whole world. Now I don't know what has come over you." You talk as if you had no heart, no pity in you. It is all Harry's influence. I see that. The lad flushed up and, going to the window, looked out for a few moments on the green, flickering, sun-lashed garden. I owe Harry a great deal, Basil, he said at last. More than I owe you. You only taught me to be vain. Well, I am punished for that, Dorian. Or shall be, some day. I don't know what you mean, Basil, he exclaimed, turning around. I don't know what you want. What do you want? I want the Dorian Gray that I used to paint, said the artist sadly. Basil, said the lad, going over to him and putting his hand on his shoulder, you have come too late. Yesterday, when I heard that Sybil Vane had killed herself. Killed herself? Good heavens, is there no doubt about that? Cried Hallward, looking him up with an expression of horror. My dear Basil, surely you don't think it was a vulgar accident? Of course she killed herself. The elder man buried his face in his hands. How fearful, he muttered, and a shudder ran through him. No, said Dorian Gray, there is nothing fearful about it. It is one of the great romantic tragedies of the age. As a rule, people who act lead the most commonplace lives. They are good husbands, or faithful wives, or something tedious. You know what I mean, middle-class virtue and all that kind of thing. How different Sybil was. She lived her finest tragedy. She was always a heroine. And last night she paid. The night you saw her, she acted badly because she had known the reality of love. When she knew its unreality, she died, as Juliet might have done. She passed again into the sphere of art. There is something of the martyr about her. Her death has all the pathetic uselessness of martyrdom, and all its wasted beauty. But as I was saying, you must not think I have not suffered. If you had come in yesterday at a particular moment, about 5:30 perhaps, or 6:15, you would have found me in tears. Even Harry, who was here, who brought me the news in fact, had no idea what I was going through. I suffered immensely. Then it was passed away. I cannot repeat an emotion. No one can, except sentimentalists. You remind me of a story Harry once told me about a certain philanthropist who spent 20 years of his life trying to get some grievance redressed or some unjust law altered. I forgot exactly what it was. Finally he succeeded, and nothing could exceed his disappointment. He had absolutely nothing to do, almost died of ennui, and became a confirmed misanthrope. And besides, my dear old Basil, if you really want to console me, teach me rather to forget what has happened, or to see it from a proper artistic point of view. Was it not Grantier who used to write La Consolation des Arts? I remember picking up a little vellum-covered book to say that yellow satin could console one for all the miseries of life. I love beautiful things that one can touch and handle. Old brocades, green bronzes, lacquer work, carved ivories, exquisite surroundings, luxury, pomp. There is much to be got from all these. But the artistic temperament that they create, or at any rate reveal, is still more to me. To become the spectator of one's own life, as Harry says, is to escape the suffering of life. I know you are surprised at my talking to you like this. You have not realized how I have developed. I was a schoolboy when you knew me. I am a man now. I have new passions, new thoughts, new ideas. I am different, but you must not like me less. I am changed, but you must always be my friend. Of course, I am very fond of Harry, but I know that you are better than he is. You are not stronger. You are much too afraid of life. but you are better. And how happy we used to be together. Don't leave me, Basil, and don't quarrel with me. I am what I am. There is nothing more to be said. The painter felt strangely moved. The lad was infinitely dear to him, and his personality had been the great turning point of his art. He could not bear the idea of reproaching him any more. After all, his indifference was probably merely a mood that would pass away. There was so much in him that was good, so much in him that was noble. Well, Dorian, he said at length with a sad smile, I won't speak to you again about this horrible thing after today. I trust your name won't be mentioned in connection with it. The inquest is to take place this afternoon. Have they summoned you? Dorian shook his head, and a look of annoyance passed over his face at the mention of the word inquest. There was something so crude and vulgar about everything of the kind. They don't know my name, he answered. But surely she did. Only my Christian name, and that I am quite sure she never mentioned it to anyone. She told me once that they were all rather curious to learn who I was, and that she invariably told them my name was Prince Charming. It was pretty of her. You must do me a drawing of Sybil, Basil. I should like to have something more than the memory of a few kisses and some broken, pathetic words. I will try and do something, Dorian, if it would please you, but you must come and sit to me for yourself again. I can't get on without you. I can never sit to you again, Basil. It is impossible, he exclaimed, staring back. The painter stared at him. My dear boy, what nonsense, he cried. Do you mean to say that you don't like what I did for you? Where is it? Why have you pulled a screen in front of it? Let me look at it. It is the best thing I have ever done. Do take the screen away, Dorian. It's simply disgraceful of your servant hiding my work like that. I felt the room looked different when I came in. My servant had nothing to do with it, Basil. You don't imagine I let him arrange my rooms for me. He settles my flowers for me sometimes. That is all. No, I did it myself. The light was too strong on the portrait. Too strong? Surely not, my dear fellow. It is an admirable place for it. Let me see it. And Hallward walked towards the corner of the room. A cry of terror broke from Dorian Gray's lips, and he rushed between the painter and the screen. Basil, he said, looking very pale, you must not look at it. I don't wish you to. Not look at my own work? You are not serious. Why shouldn't I look at it? Exclaimed Hallward, laughing. If you try to look at it, Basil, on my word of honour, I will never speak with you again as long as I live. I am quite serious. I don't offer any explanation, and you are not to ask for any. But remember, if you touch the screen, everything is over between us. Hallward was thunderstruck. He looked at Dorian Gray in absolute amazement. He had never seen him like this before. The lad was actually pallid with rage. His hands were clenched, the pupils of his eyes were like discs of blue fire, and he was trembling all over. Dorian, don't speak. But what is the matter? Of course I won't look if you don't want me to, he said, rather coldly, turning on his heel and going over to the window. But really, it seems rather absurd that I shouldn't see my own work, especially as I'm going to exhibit it in Paris in autumn. I shall probably give another coat of varnish before that, so I must see it some day, so why not today? To exhibit it? You want to exhibit it? Exclaimed Dorian Gray, a strange sense of terror creeping over him. Was the world going to be shown his secret? Were people to gape at the mystery of his life? It was impossible. Something, he did not know what, had to be done at once. Yes, I don't suppose you will object to that. Georges Petit is going to collect all my best pictures for a special exhibition at the Reticences, which will open in the first week of October. The portrait will only be away for a month. I should think you could easily spare time for that. In fact, you are sure to be out of town, and if you keep it always behind a screen, you can't care much about it. Dorian Gray passed his hand over his forehead. There were beads of perspiration there. He felt that he was on the brink of a horrible danger. "You told me a month ago that you would never exhibit it," he cried. "Why have you changed your mind? You people who go in for being consistent have just as many moods as others have. The only difference is that your moods are rather meaningless. You can't have forgotten that you assured me most solemnly that nothing in the world would induce you to send it to any exhibition. You told Harry exactly the same thing." He stopped suddenly, and a gleam of light came into his eyes. He remembered that Lord Henry had said to him once, half seriously and half in jest, "If you want to have a strange quarter of an hour, get Basil to tell you why he won't exhibit your picture. He told me why he wouldn't, and it was a revelation to me." Yes, perhaps Basil, too, had his secret. He would ask him, and try. "Basil," he said, coming over quite close and looking him straight in the face, "we each of us have a secret. Let me know yours and I shall tell you mine. What was the reason for refusing to exhibit my picture?" The painter shuddered in spite of himself. "Dorian, if I told you, you might like me less than you do, and you would certainly laugh at me. I could not bear you doing either of those two things. If you wish me to never look upon your picture again, I am content. I have always you to look at. If you wish the best work I have ever done to be hidden from the world, I am satisfied. Your friendship is dearer to me than any fame or reputation." "No, Basil, you must tell me," insisted Dorian Gray. "I think I have the right to know." His feeling of terror had passed away, and curiosity had taken its place. He was determined to find out Basil Hallward's mystery. "Let us sit down, Dorian," said the painter, looking troubled. "Let us sit down, and just answer me one question. Have you noticed in the picture something curious? Something that probably at first did not strike you, but that revealed itself to you suddenly?" "Basil!" cried the lad, clutching at the arms of the chair with trembling hands, and gazing at him with wild, startled eyes. "I see you did. Don't speak. Wait till you hear what I have to say. Dorian, from the moment I met you, your personality had the most extraordinary influence over me. I was dominated, soul, brain, and power, by you. You became to me the visible incarnation of that unseen ideal whose memory haunts us artists like an exquisite dream. I worshipped you. I grew jealous over every one to whom you spoke. I wanted to have you all to myself. I was only happy when I was with you. When you were away from me, you were still present in my art, of course. I never let you know about any of this. It would have been impossible. You would have not understood it. I hardly understood it myself. I only knew that I had seen perfection face to face, and that the world had become wonderful to my eyes. Too wonderful, perhaps, for in any mad worships there is peril, the peril of losing them, no less than the peril of keeping them. Weeks and weeks went on, and I grew more and more absorbed in you. Then came a new development. I had drawn you as Paris in dainty armor, and as Adonis with huntsman's cloak and polished boar spear. Crowned, in heavy lotus blossoms, you had sat on the prow of Adrian's barge, gazing out across the turbid green Nile. You had leaned over the still pool of some Greek woodland, and seen in the water's silent silver the marvel of your own face. And it had all been what dead ages, but in your own dress and in your own time. Whether it was the realism of the method or the mere wonder of your own personality, thus directly presented to me without mist or veil, I cannot tell. But I know that I worked at it. Every flake and film of color seemed to me to reveal my secret. I grew afraid that others would know of my idolatry. I felt, Dorian, that I had told too much, that I had put too much of myself into it. Then it was that I resolved never to allow the picture to be exhibited. You were a little annoyed, but then you did not realize what that all meant to me. Harry, to whom I talked to it about, laughed at me. But I did not mind that. When the picture was finished, I sat alone with it. I felt that I was right. Well, after a few days, the thing left my studio, and as soon as I had gotten rid of the intolerable fascination of its presence, it seemed to me that I had been foolish in imagining that I had seen anything in it more than that you were extremely good-looking and that I could paint. Even now I cannot help feeling that it was a mistake to think that the passion one feels in creation is ever really shown in the work one creates. Art is almost more abstract than we fancy. Form and colour tell us form and colour, that is all. It often seems to me that art conceals the artist far more completely than it ever reveals him. And so when I got the offer from Paris, I was determined to make your portrait the principal thing in my exhibition. It never occurred to me that you would refuse. I see now that you are right. The picture cannot be shown. You must not be angry with me, Dorian, for what I have told you. As I said to Harry once, you are made to be worshipped. Dorian Gray drew a long breath. The colour came back into his cheeks, and a smile played about his lips. The peril was over. He was safe for the time. Yet he could not help feeling infinite pity for the painter who had just made this strange confession to him, and wondered if he himself would ever be so dominated by the personality of a friend. Lord Henry had the charm of being very dangerous, but that was all. He was too clever and too cynical to be really fond of. Would there ever be someone who would fill him with a strange idolatry? Was that one of the things that life had in store? It is extraordinary to me, Dorian, said Hallward, that you should have seen this in the portrait. Did you really see it? I saw something in it, he answered. Something that seemed to me very curious. Well, you don't mind my looking at the thing now? Dorian shook his head. You must not ask me that, Basil. I could not possibly let you stand in front of that picture. You will some day, surely. Never. Well, perhaps you are right. And now goodbye, Dorian. You have been the one person in my life who has really influenced my art. Whatever I have done that is good, I owe to you. Ah, you don't know what it cost me to tell you all that I have told you. My dear Basil, said Dorian, what have you told me? Simply that you felt you admired me too much. That is not even a compliment. It was not intended as a compliment. It was a confession. Now that I have made it, something seems to have gone out of me. Perhaps one should never put one's worship into words. It was a very disappointing confession. Why? What did you expect, Dorian? You didn't see anything else in the picture, did you? There was nothing else to see. No, there is nothing else to see. Why do you ask? But you mustn't talk about worship. It is foolish. You and I are friends, Basil, and we must always remain so. You've got Harry, the painter said sadly. Oh, Harry, cried the lad with a ripple of laughter. Harry spends his days in saying what is incredible, and his evenings in doing what is improbable. Just the sort of life I would like to lead, but I still don't think I would go to Harry if I were in trouble. I would sooner go to you, Basil. You will sit to me again? Impossible. You spoil my life as an artist by refusing, Dorian. No man comes across two ideal things. Few come across one. I can't explain it to you, Basil, but I must never sit to you again. There is something fatal about a portrait. It has a life of its own. I will come and have tea with you. That will be just as pleasant. Pleasanter for you, I'm afraid, murmured Hallward regretfully. And now goodbye. I am sorry you won't let me look at the picture once again, but that can't be helped. I quite understand what you feel about it. As he left the room, Dorian Gray smiled to himself. Poor Basil! How little he knew of the true reason. And how strange it was that instead of having to be forced to reveal his own secret, he had succeeded, almost by chance, in wresting a secret from his friend. How strange that confession explained to him the painter's absurd fits of jealousy, his wild devotion, his extravagant panegyrics, his curious reticence. He understood them all now, and he felt sorry. There seemed to be something tragic in a friendship so coloured by romance. He sighed and touched the bell. The portrait must be hidden away at all costs. He could not run the risk of such discovery again. It had been mad of him to allow the thing to remain, even for an hour, in a room to which any of his friends had access. Chapter 10. When his servant entered, he looked at him steadfastly, and wondered if he had thought of peering behind the screen. The man was quite impassive, and waited for his orders. Dorian lit a cigarette, and walked over to the glass, and glanced into it. He could see the reflection of Victor's face perfectly. It was like a placid mask of civility. There was nothing to be afraid of there. Yet he thought it best to be on his guard. Speaking very slowly, he told him to tell the housekeeper that he wanted to see her, and then go on to the frame-maker and ask him to send 2 of his men round at once. It seemed to him that as the man left the room his eyes wandered in the direction of the screen. Or was that merely his own fancy? After a few moments, in her black silk dress, with old-fashioned thread mittens on her wrinkled hands, Mrs. Leaf bustled into the library. He asked her for the key of the schoolroom. "The old schoolroom, Mr. Dorian," she exclaimed. "Why, it is full of dust. I must get it arranged and put straight before you go into it. It is not fit for you to see, sir. It is not indeed." "I don't want it put straight, Leaf. I only want the key." "Well, sir, you'll be covered with cobwebs if you go into it. Why, it hasn't been opened in nearly 5 years, not since his lordship died." He winced at the mention of his grandfather. He had hateful memories of him. "That does not matter," he answered. "I simply want to see the place. That is all. Give me the key." "And here is the key, sir," said the old lady, going over to the contents of her bunch with tremulously uncertain hands. "Here is the key. I'll have it off the bunch in a moment. But you don't think of living up there, sir, and you so comfortable here." "Oh, no," he cried petulantly. "Thank you, Leaf. That will do." She lingered for a few moments, and was garrulous over some detail of the household. He sighed, and told her to manage things as she thought best. She left the room, wreathed in smiles. As the door closed, Dorian put the key into his pocket, and looked around the room. His eye fell on the large purple satin coverlet, heavily embroidered with gold, and a splendid piece of late 17th century Venetian work that his grandfather had found in a convent near Bologna. Yes, that would serve as a wrap to wrap the dreadful thing in. It had been perhaps served often as a pall for the dead. Now it was to hide something that had a corruption of its own, worse than the corruption of death itself, something that would breed horrors and yet would never die. What the worm was to the corpse, his sins would be to the painted image on the canvas. They would mar its beauty and eat away its grace. They would defile it and make it shameful, and yet the thing would still live on. It would always be alive. He shuddered, and for a moment he regretted that he had not told Basil the true reason why he had wished to hide this picture away. Basil would have helped him to resist Lord Henry's influence, and the still more poisonous influences that came from his own temperament. The love that he bore him, for it was really love, had nothing in it that was not noble and intellectual. It was not the mere physical admiration of beauty that is born of the senses and that dies when the senses tire. It was such love as Michelangelo had known, and Montaigne and Winckelmann and Shakespeare himself. Yes, Basil could have saved him, but it was too late now. The past could always be annihilated. Regret, denial, or forgetfulness could do that. But the future was inevitable. There were passions in him that would find their terrible outlet, dreams that would make the shadow of their evil real. He took up from the couch the great purple and gold texture that covered it, and holding it in his hands, passed behind the screen. Was the face on the canvas even viler than before? It seemed to him that it was unchanged, and yet his loathing of it was intensified. Gold hair, blue eyes, rose-red lips, they all were there. It was simply the expression that had altered. That was horrible in its cruelty, compared to what he saw in it of the censure of rebuke. How shallow Basil's reproaches about Sybil Vale had been. How shallow, of what little account. His own soul was looking out at him from the canvas and calling him to judgment. A look of pain came across him, and he flung the rich pall over the picture. As he did so, a knock came to the door. He passed out as his servant entered. "The persons are here, monsieur." He felt that the man must be got rid of at once. He must not be allowed to know where the picture was being taken to. There was something sly about him, and he had thoughtful, treacherous eyes. Sitting down at the writing table, he scribbled a note to Lord Henry, asking him to send round something to read, and reminding him that they were to meet at 8:15 that evening. "Wait for an answer," he said, handing it to him, "and show the men in here." In 2 or 3 minutes there was another knock, and Mr. Hubbard himself, the celebrated frame-maker of South Audley Street, came in with a somewhat rough-looking young assistant. Mr. Hubbard was a florid, red-whiskered little man, whose admiration for art was considerably tempered by the inveterate impecuniosity of most artists who dealt with him. As a rule, he never left his shop. He waited for people to come to him, but he always made an exception in favour of Dorian Gray. There was something about Dorian that charmed everybody. It was a pleasure to even see him. "What can I do for you today, Mr. Gray?" he said, rubbing his fat freckled hands. "I thought I would do myself the honour of coming round in person. I have just got a beauty of a frame, sir. Picked it up at a sale. Old Florentine. Came from Fonthill, I believe. Admirably suited for a religious subject, Mr. Gray." "I am so sorry you have given yourself the trouble of coming round, Mr. Hubbard. I shall certainly drop in and look at the frame, though I don't go much at present for religious art. But today I only want a picture carried to the top of the house for me. It is rather heavy, so I thought I would ask you to lend a couple of your men." "No trouble at all, Mr. Gray. I am delighted to be of any service to you. Which is the work of art, sir?" "This," replied Dorian, moving the screen back. "Can you move it, covering and all, just as it is? I don't want it to get scratched going upstairs." "There will be no difficulty, sir," said the genial frame-maker, beginning, with the aid of his assistant, to unhook the picture from the long brass chain by which it was suspended. "And now where shall we carry it to, Mr. Gray?" "I will show you the way, Mr. Hubbard, if you will kindly follow me. Or perhaps you had better go in front. I'm afraid it is right at the top of the house. We will go up by the front staircase, as it is wider." He held open the door for them, and they passed out into the hall and began the ascent. The elaborate character of the frame had made the picture extremely bulky, and now and then, in spite of the obsequious protests of Mr. Hubbard, who had the true tradesman's spirit dislike of seeing a gentleman do anything useful, Dorian put his hand to it so as to help them. "Something of a load to carry, sir," gasped the little man when they reached the top landing. He wiped his shiny forehead. "I'm afraid it is rather heavy," murmured Dorian as he unlocked the door that opened the room that was to keep his curious secret of life and hide his soul from the eyes of men. He had not entered the place for more than 4 years, Not indeed, since he had first used it as a playroom when he was a child, and then as a study when he grew somewhat older. It was a large, well-proportioned room, which had been built specially by the Lord Kelso for the use of his little grandson, whom, for this strange likeness to his mother, and for also other reasons, he had always hated and desired to keep at a distance. It appeared to Dorian to have but little changed. There was the huge Italian cassone, with its fantastically painted panels and its tarnished gilt mouldings, which he had so often hidden himself as a boy. There the stained satin-work bookcase filled with his dog-eared schoolbooks. On the walls behind it hanging the same ragged Flemish tapestry where a faded king and queen were playing chess in a garden, while the company of hawkers rode by, carrying hooded birds on their gauntlet wrists. How well he remembered it all! Every moment of his lonely childhood came back to him as he looked around. He recalled the stainless purity of his boyish life, and it seemed horrible to him that it was here in the fatal portrait was to be hidden away. How little he had thought in those dead days of all that was in store for him. But there was no other place in the house so securing from prying eyes as this. He had the key, and no one else could enter it. Beneath its purple pall, the face painted on the canvas could grow bestial, sodden, and unclean. What did it matter? No one could see it. He himself would not see it. Why should he watch the hideous corruption of his own soul? He kept his youth. That was enough. And besides, might not his nature grow finer, after all? There was no reason that the future should be so full of shame. Some love might come across his life and purify him, and shield him from those sins that seemed to already be stirring in the spirit and in the flesh. Those curious, unpictured sins, whose very mystery lent them their subtlety and their charm. Perhaps some day the cruel look will have passed away from the scarlet, sensitive mouth, and he might show to the world Basil Hallward's masterpiece. No, that was impossible. Hour by hour and week by week the thing upon the canvas was growing old. It might escape the hideousness of sin, but the hideousness of age was in store for it. Cheeks would become hollow or flaccid. The yellow crow's feet would creep around the fading eyes and make them horrible. The hair would lose its brightness, and the mouth would gape or droop, would be foolish or gross as the mouths of old men were. There would be some wrinkled throat and cold blue-veined hands, the twisted body that he remembered in the grandfather who had been so stern to him in his boyhood. The picture had to be concealed. There was no help for it. "Bring it in, Mr. Hubbard, please," he said, wearily turning around. "I am sorry I kept you so long. I was thinking of something else." "Always glad to have a rest, Mr. Gray," answered the frame-maker, who was still gasping for breath. "Where shall we put it, sir?" "Oh, anywhere. Here, this will do. I don't want to have it hang up. Just lean it against the wall. Thanks." "Might one look at the work of art, sir?" Dorian started. "It would not interest you, Mr. Hubbard," he said, keeping his eyes on the man. He felt ready to leap upon him and fling him to the ground if he dared to lift the gorgeous hanging that concealed the secret of his life. "I shan't trouble you any more now. I am much obliged for your kindness in coming around." Not at all, Mr. Gray. Ever ready to do anything for you, sir?" And Mr. Hubbard trampled down the stairs, followed by his assistant, who glanced back at Dorian with a look of shy wonder on his rough, uncomely face. He had never seen anyone so marvellous. The sound of their footsteps had died away. Dorian locked the door and put the key in his pocket. He felt safe now. No one would ever look upon the horrible thing. No eye but his would ever see his shame. On reaching the library, he found that it was just after 5 o'clock, and that the tea had already been brought up. On the little table of dark perfumed wood thickly encrusted with nacre, a present from Lady Radley, his guardian's wife, a pretty professional invalid who had spent the preceding winter in Cairo, was lying a note from Lord Henry, and beside it a book was bound in yellow paper, the cover slightly torn and the edges soiled. A copy of the third edition of the St. James's Gazette had been placed on the tea-tray. It was evident that Victor had returned. He wondered if he had met the men in the hallway as they were leaving the house, and had wormed out of them what they had been doing. He would be sure to miss the picture, had no doubt missed it already, while he had been laying the tea things. The screen had not been set back, and a blank space was visible on the wall. Perhaps he might find him creeping upstairs to try and force the door open of the room. It was a horrible thing to have a spy in one's house. He had heard of rich men who had been blackmailed all their lives by some servant who had read a letter or overheard a conversation, or picked up a card with an address, or found beneath a pillow a withered flower or a shred of crumpled lace. He sighed, and having poured out some tea, he opened Lord Henry's note. It was simply to say that he sent them round the evening paper and a book that might interest him, and that he would be at the club at 8:15. He opened the St. James languidly and looked through it. A red pencil mark on the 5th page caught his eye. It drew his attention to the following paragraph. Inquest on an actress. An inquest was held this morning at the Bell Tavern, Hoxton Road, by Mr. Danby, the district coroner, on the body of Sybil Vane, a young actress recently engaged in the Royal Theatre, Holborn. A verdict of death by misadventure was returned. Considerable sympathy was expressed for the mother of the deceased, who was greatly affected during the giving of her own evidence and that of Dr. Birrell, who made the post-mortem examination of the deceased. He frowned, tearing the paper in two, went across the room and flung the pieces away. How ugly it all was, and how horribly real ugliness made things. He felt a little annoyed with Lord Henry for having sent him the report, and certainly stupid of him to have marked it with red pencil. Victor might have read it. The man knew more than enough English for that. Perhaps he had read it and begun to suspect something, and yet what does it matter? What had Dorian Gray to do with Sybil Vane's death? There was nothing to fear. Dorian Gray had not killed her. His eye fell on the yellow book that Lord Henry had sent him. What was it, he wondered? He went towards the little pearl-coloured octagonal stand that had always looked to him like a work of some strange Egyptian bees that wrought in silver, and taking up the volume, flung himself into an armchair and began to turn over the leaves. After a few minutes he became absorbed. It was the strangest book he had ever read. It seemed to him that in exquisite raiment, and to the delicate sound of the flutes, the sins of the world were passing in dumb show before him. The things that he had dimly dreamed of were suddenly made real to him. Things of which he had never dreamed were gradually revealed. It was a novel without a plot, and with only one character, being, indeed, simply a psychological study of a certain young Parisian who spent his life trying to realize in the 19th century all the passions and modes of thought that belonged to every century except his own, and to sum it up, as it were, in himself the various moods through which the world's spirit had ever passed, loving for their mere artificiality those ruinations that men have unwisely called virtue, as much as those natural rebellions that wise men still call sin. The style in which it was written was that curious jewelled style, vivid and obscure at once, full of argot and archanisms, of technical expressions, and of elaborate colour. The life of these senses was described in the terms of mystical philosophy. One hardly knew at times whether one was reading the spiritual ecstasies of some medieval saint, or the morbid confessions of a modern sinner. It was a poisonous book. The heavy odour of incense seemed to cling about its pages and to trouble the brain. The mere cadence of the sentences, the subtle monotony of their music, so full as it was of complex refrains and movements elaborately repeated, produced in the mind of a lad, as he passed from chapter to chapter, a form of reverie, a malady of dreaming. that made him unconscious of the falling day and the creeping shadows. Cloudless and pierced by one solitary star, a copper-green sky gleamed through the windows. He read on by its wan light until he could read no more. Then, after his valet had reminded him several times of the lateness of the hour, he got up and, going into the next room, placed the book on the little Florentine table that had always stood at his bedside, and began to dress for dinner. It was almost 9 o'clock before he reached the club, where he found Lord Henry sitting alone in the morning room, looking very much bored. "I am so sorry, Harry," he cried, "but it really is entirely your fault. That book you sent me so fascinated me that I forgot time was going."
"Yes, I thought you would like it," replied his host, rising from his chair.
"I didn't say I liked it, Harry. I said it fascinated me. There is a great difference."
"Ah, you have discovered that?"
murmured Lord Henry, and they passed into the dining room. That concludes our tale for this week, my friend. Please return next week, and we will continue our journey through The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. If you wish to rest some more, please find a space that suits you. Whether you curl up by the fire, partake in some food and beverages in our kitchen, take a nap in one of our many rooms, or take a stroll around the garden, please know you are always welcome at Sniper's Rest, my friend. If you are continuing your journey, the multiverse has a variety in store today. To the north, take on the role of a plucky little alien who has to endure some serious stuff in order to save himself and the other folk of his kind.
Hello, follow me. Okay.
To the west, a dangerous, vast ocean awaits you. You're stuck on a raft floating through an endless ocean. You're gonna have to figure out some way to survive and protect yourself from all these damn sharks. Discover the secrets the occasional passing islands have to offer you, so you can get out of here. To the east, welcome to the hellish world of a totalitarian state. The ruler of this place is a twisted man with insane ideologies. You must help a young woman escape the walls of this awful place. Good luck to you both. You're going to need it. And if you are making your own way out there, good luck, my friend, wherever you end up. Wherever you come from and wherever you're going, thank you for spending some time here with us at Sniper's Rest. Remember to take care of yourself, be kind to others, hydrate, take a moment to look out into the world and marvel at how incredible it all is. How incredible you are, friend. Until next time, please take care on your way.